It is indeed an honor for me to address this annual Devolution Conference, which has become an important event in our calendar as a nation, because it is a time that we come together to interrogate ourselves and see what we have done as counties. And I congratulate all the counties for the great work you have done. Looking at the compendium that was shown to us and the little video, I am just in awe for what you have done for our people. Devolution is indeed one of the values and principles entrenched in our Constitution, and we at the judiciary have also mirrored our operations to the social transformation promise, which requires governments, both at the national and the county levels, to reach the most marginalized and vulnerable members of our communities. This is the spirit of devolution. To effectively deliver on this promise requires unhindered collaboration and coordination of all the actors, both in the national government and in the county governments, while recognizing the inherent nature of our independence. When I woke up this morning, I was a little discouraged because I was attacked for attending a meeting of intergovernmental stakeholder meeting to plan the preparedness of our institutions for the coming general elections. And when I woke up, I asked myself, now, the Judicial Service Act gives me the mandate to be the link for the judiciary with other government agencies and other arms of government. It also creates the National Council on the Administration of Justice, whose mandate is to collaborate and coordinate all the actors in the administration of justice to ensure that at the end of the day we render seamless services. So I ask myself, when I come now to meet politicians, what will they say about me? Then I told myself, we have to celebrate always this Constitution that we have, which expresses the wishes of our people, and because our people were very clear that the independence of the judiciary should be underpinned in the Constitution. It cannot just be taken away. When we were children, we used to suffer many sicknesses because of where we grew up. One of them was a skin rash we used to call mwale. If you met somebody who had mwale, they would infect you with mwale. So what I try to tell Kenyans is that independence of the judiciary is deep, is fundamental. It cannot be taken away simply because I have sat with other agencies of government, with the politicians. We are required by our Constitution to collaborate and coordinate our affairs. No one can act in a silo and be able to deliver for the people. It is for that reason the people ask for a devolution of power to local levels so that there is participation by the people. And almost everywhere, the people wanted the state restructured. They wanted to have greater control of their own destiny and to be free to determine their choices of lifestyles and affairs. They wanted more communal forms of organizations, including the role of elders defined. That is critical to devolution. The people also wanted mechanisms to regain control over their destinies and to look at their future with their own eyes. When the Supreme Court considered the tenets of devolution in advisory opinion number 2 of 2013, the former Chief Justice, a son of this region, Kitui County, whom we celebrate also, stated, and I quote, Dr. Willy Mutunga, "Devolution is the anchor promise of the new Constitution. It reverses the system of control and authority established by the colonial powers and continued by successive governments. The land devolution matters evidences the central place of devolution in the deconstruction of our state. Thus, Chapter 11 only approach would wrongly obscure the interlocking nature of devolution with other aspects and institutions of the Constitution, an element which is critical to the success." End of quote. I also had occasion to sit in a case that requested us to find that health services should be returned to the national government because there was total failure by the counties to deliver health to the people. And we interrogated ourselves as a bench of 3 judges in the Court of Appeal, asking ourselves, what is our role as a judiciary? And we were reminded of the principle of devolution, which is one of the principles that we should respect and uphold all the time. And although there was overwhelming persuasion that health should go back to the national government, we were also reminded a few counties are doing well in health, especially Makueni was cited, and we had confidence to tell them health will remain a devolved function, and if you don't know how to do health, come to Makueni and see how it is done. So we in the judiciary uphold that principle and value of devolution. This conference is the embodiment of the constitutional premise of collaborative governance that is required by our Constitution in Article 6. The national anthem that we all sing and we have sung for many, many years also reinforces the values by calling us, we all, and with one accord, in one common bond, united, build this nation together. And this is what embodied me this morning, that nobody can expect the judiciary to remain alone and deliver justice. We must work with others, because indeed we work for others. We don't work for ourselves, we work for others. Turning to the theme of the conference, for a long time, we took our environment and the natural resources that God has granted us for granted, never thinking of them as limited resources we could use up, and so never developing innovations against making use of them without concerns about the future. Today, however, the fact that human activities are causing climate change is no longer deniable, and it is now widely accepted that through our actions, we can harm ourselves. We can also harm each other, and we can harm the future generations. This makes this year's theme of the annual Devolution Conference on Climate Change and the role of sub-national, namely county governments, in mitigating climate change a timely topic, given that the impact of climate change can already be felt in our country, in our communities, and in the ecosystems through increased incidents of droughts, floods, heat waves, to name just a few examples of the incidents of extreme weather events associated with climate change. The time for climate action is now, given the impact of these changed climate conditions to our people's ability to access water, the resulting low agricultural productivity, leading to food insecurity, negative impact on our people's health conditions, damage to critical infrastructure that disrupts our transport systems, water and sanitation infrastructure, to name just a few direct consequences of climate change. This makes it clear that we should move with speed to embrace measures that promote adaptation to our new reality and put in place policies and measures to mitigate the impact of climate change on our communities and ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, beyond the realm of personal ethics, which imputes a moral obligation on each one of us in our individual capacities to change our behaviors in response to environmental concerns, all state organs have an obligation to promote adaptation to this climate reality and adopt policies and measures to mitigate its impact on our people and future generations. Effective and equitable climate actions demand that mitigation and adaptation policy interventions in response to climate change be pursued on multiple scales of governance, the global, the national, and the subnational levels. In fact, while the setting of mitigation standards is often made at the international and national levels, adaptation and mitigation activities are often implemented and have impact at local levels. Thus, it is at this county level of government that is best placed to implement actions intended to mitigate and adapt to climate change. A look at the assigned functions from the national and county governments and our Constitution reveals that the county governments have a heavy responsibility of climate action due to the link between the functions assigned to the counties and the impact of the climate change. We face a future where there is a likelihood of the emergence of many life-threatening diseases because of climate change. Indeed, and many speakers before have spoken about the global pandemic, COVID-19, and the increased incidences of outbreaks of Ebola, Marburg virus, and other viruses are testament to this reality. It follows that the climate change is likely to have a drastic impact on health care, and this imposes an obligation on the county governments to strengthen their primary health care system as a response to these health impacts. In the sphere of agriculture, field crop agricultural production and the effects of drought on animal husbandry will expose the country to food insecurity and increased risk of malnutrition, increased food prices, and incidences of starvation. As the level of government vested with the functional competence of agriculture, that includes crop and animal husbandry, the county governments ought to incorporate climate change mitigation and adaptation measures in our agricultural policies and legislations. And I'm very, very happy to note many counties have indeed enacted policies and legislations to that effect. In addition, water stress is expected to be worsened by climate change. This means we are headed to a future where our citizens and communities will be subjected to increased incidences of water scarcity, and this will be accompanied with the likelihood of the spread of waterborne diseases. Relevant to us is the fact that water and sanitation services are a functional competence of the county governments. Thus, the county executive and assemblies must be alive to these realities and begin to adopt and implement mitigation and adaptation measures before it gets too late. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, time is not on our side. We are running towards the possibility of being caught and prepared. Thus, both the national and county governments ought to make serious efforts to prepare for this looming threat to us and to our future generations. Thus, the key point to note is that the consequences of our failure to act now is likely to outweigh any considerations that is hindering us from adopting the requisite adaptation and mitigation measures to climate change. I will speak briefly about climate action and climate justice and link this to the vision we launched recently in the judiciary, which we call the social transformation through access to justice and our social justice jurisprudence. The Constitution on Article 10 articulates our foundational values and principles that include sustainable development, human dignity, human rights, and social justice. These values and principles and the rights that give effect to them are the rights to human dignity, social and economic rights, and the right to a clean and healthy environment, which have implications for duty bearers like county governments with respect to climate action. It also means that there is climate action which has a justice element. The social justice aspect of climate change include 4 elements. 1 is the principle of prevention. 2, intergenerational sustainability. 3, protection of the rights of the most vulnerable. And 4, fair participation, which has a procedural requirement to involve people for whom we make decisions to be part of those decision making. These 4 elements are enforceable as justiciable claims, and our courts are already developing jurisprudence to give effect to them. Thus, the county and the national governments should be on notice that they must take climate action obligation seriously, lest you'll be brought to court and there will be findings against you for breach of the climate change. The first principle of an equitable response to climate change is prevention, effective and rapid action to avoid dangerous climate change. This means that county governments must act and be seen to take action to prevent climate change. Intergenerational climate change, the second principle demands that future generations should not inherit reduced life opportunities due to our unsustainable use of natural resources and degradation of essential eco and climatic systems. It is also made clear under Article 42 of our Constitution that we have to take sufficient action to prevent dangerous climate change. This is an obligation that our courts and tribunals have enforced in several instances, including in the Save Ramu case before the National Environmental Tribunal on building a coal-fired power plant in Ram. The third principle is the obligation to access policy choices according to their impact in protecting the most vulnerable by 1, reducing exposure and increasing adaptive capacity of the most vulnerable communities and population groups, avoiding entrenching or exacerbating existing inequalities, for example, by creating disproportionate financial impacts on poor households. These principles speak to the social and economic rights and the right to human dignity of the vulnerable groups of persons within our communities. County governments have an obligation to ensure that these persons access socioeconomic goods like food, water, and health care as part of their mitigation and adaptation measures to ensure that these people's rights are not violated as a result of the impact of climate change with its manifestations in the form of drought, floods, pandemics, among others. In addition, the effect of climate adaptation and mitigation policies is a crucial issue in any discussion of the response to climate change. We should bear in mind always that the cost of adapting to climate change should not disproportionately fall on the poor and the vulnerable members of our society. Where the cost of adaptation and mitigation measures is not thought through carefully, they have the undesirable effect of increasing inequality in our society. Lastly, the entire policy development, implementation, and evaluation process related to climate change should involve active participation of stakeholders, with an emphasis on the fair participation of vulnerable and marginalized groups. Given our Constitution's strong commitment to the ethos of democratic participation in governance, whenever the national or county governments engage in climate action related to policy development, the citizens, including the vulnerable groups, must be involved, as it is only through their input that we can ensure that adaptation and mitigation policies are owned by the very people that it is going to affect. Indeed, it is given that climate change will affect food security, access to water, and health outcomes in our country. This is likely to see the living conditions of the vulnerable segment of our community worsen and exacerbate the already existing inequalities in our society. What this should tell us is that the most vulnerable need to be included in our decision-making efforts. This is an obligation that has been enforced by our High Court in Mohammed Ali Bandi case with respect to the Rapset project, and in the Koome Basin Koroko community case with respect to coal mining projects. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that our Constitution imposes a climate action obligation on all state actors, more so the national and the county governments, as evident from the Charter's insistence on sustainable development. In addition, we come to grips with the threats, dangers, and challenges of climate change and the required climate action. There is need to bear in mind the social justice imperative in the Constitution that requires that our mitigation and adaptation measures and policies protect the vulnerable, the excluded communities, and population groups among both the current and the future generations. I thank you for listening. I thank you for inviting me. Long live devolution. Long live climate justice for all of us. Thank you.